everyone, and welcome to Coproduce Care Chat for Care. This month, as many of you will know, throughout the whole of October, we're planning on doing a series of live streams concentrating on Black History Month. And for that, we have a set of chats named #The Colour of Care. So do tweet and message on any of our social medias using that hashtag. And what we're looking at this month is the role of people who are working in social care, who are from various ethnicities, and the issues of race, the issue of equality, inequality, and inclusion, diversity. So it's a great time to be having these discussions, especially as COVID is affecting all of us in so many different ways. So my name's Sophie Chester-Glynn. I'm the director at Coproduce Care, and I'm supported by a fantastic team. Some of us are volunteers. It's a non-profit organisation, so we're just trying our best, as always, to talk about social care and give people who work in social care a voice and talk about issues in more depth than you would normally on a 10-minute clip on the news, maybe. So I'm hoping that you'll enjoy all the wonderful things we have coming up. And maybe, you know, in the future, you might think of subscribing to our YouTube channel or liking our Facebook page, or however you are watching us. Do engage, because we know we're doing this. There's no finance or funding involved. We're just really passionate about giving social care a bigger voice. And we have some fantastic things coming up as well, which I'll talk about later on in the show. So for today, we're going to be talking to Symone Stuart and Louise Christie. They both work at an organisation called Skills for Care. Many of you would have heard us talk about Skills for Care before. It supports the social care sector, especially managers, in training, in leadership, and a whole set more. But I was involved earlier in the summer with a set of webinars that they did talking about the BAME workforce. And it was, for me, I just thought it was a fantastic thing that they were doing, concentrating on the BAME workforce in social care. There's a lot done in the NHS, but in social care, it's a bit of a taboo. I don't know why we don't talk about it as much, but it's definitely something that doesn't get as much airtime. So it was just fantastic that Skills for Care were leading on just even starting the conversation. So yeah, absolutely delighted to have both of them on it, because they were involved in getting a few projects off the ground in a very short period of time. It was all systems go, and some really fantastic impact, which we're going to hear about today. So really hope that you engage, that you listen, that you can learn even and be inspired by what they've done. And as always, use the chat function so that you can give us some comments. Maybe we can spark a debate. And if you're watching us on maybe Twitter, on our Twitter feed, then just retweet us, or just share the link in any way that you can to get more people joining in this conversation. So that's enough of me babbling on. I'm going to introduce both Symone and Louise. Hello, both of you. How are you today?
We're good. Good morning, Sophie.
Morning, Sophie. Hi.
Morning. It's lovely to have you on today, because you had so many different speakers on the webinars, and you've been there working in the background doing all this stuff. And I just think it's a great opportunity to actually hear from people doing this fantastic work, you know, and just hearing the ideas behind it. So maybe you can just spend a couple of minutes kind of talking about your roles in Skills for Care, and then we'll go on to some of your inspirational figures for Black History Month. Symone, did you want to start us off?
Okay, sure. So my name, as Sophie's mentioned, is Symone Stuart, and I'm a project manager at Skills for Care. I work in the leadership and management team. We deliver a suite of leadership programs and interventions aimed at leaders at all levels in adult social care. But the majority of my role is around managing the Moving Up program and our diverse workforce interventions.
Lovely. And Louise?
Yeah, following on from Symone, yeah, I'm in the leadership and management team as well, and I play a dual role of project manager, but I'm also a facilitator on our leadership programs, and I do quite a lot of action learning. And I've worked on the Moving Up project. Symone was on maternity leave when I first joined the company, But I also work with registered managers, principal social workers, principal occupational therapists, and nurse leaders as well, and lots of other people within the sector. As you know, it's very wide and varied, and we do what we can around leadership, and really, supporting the sector in any which way we can.
Great, wonderful. And did I describe Skills for Care right? Because I'm always conscious that it does specifically support managers, isn't it, and registered managers in social care. So
I think it's a little bit wider.
Yes,
we've got programs that support directors and commissioners, as well as the regulated workforce that I was describing. But certainly we do an awful lot of support around registered managers and deputy managers, and actually network chairs as well, the people that run the networks in their regions as well. So, we try and put the support where it's needed.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if as many people know about what the work that you're doing as they should do, but I'm definitely hoping that streams like this will definitely give it a little bit more airtime, because it is, the projects that you're kind of churning out are at such a high speed and really supportive to the sector. So before we get into those projects, because I'm sure people want to hear more about it, we are in October, it's Black History Month, and it's good to kind of ground it, not only in the future of what we're going to be doing in the future later on to try and support people, but also some of the people who have kind of inspired us in the past. So who wants to start off?
I can go. So I for me, when you asked me this question, Sophie, I was thinking about being back at school and being in class. And I don't know why this stands out for me, but it really did stand out for me. I remember being in my history class, and I won't mention my teacher's name just in case he's still listening to this, but I really loved history. And I remember asking a question about why we were learning about history, but there doesn't seem to be any representation from people of color at all. I was then fog marched out of the classroom and told to go to the headmistress's office. Yeah. But what was really interesting was I had a real interest in classical music and around the 1800 period. And I really wanted to engage and know more about why there was no mention of people of color in terms of history in that period. Anyway, as years went on, and my love for classical music continued, I came across a lady called Amanda Aldridge. And it was funny because I'd tag along to my mum's church one day, and there was this book about Amanda Aldridge. So Amanda Aldridge was born in 1866, and she lived in Upper Norwood, which is literally a stone throw away from where I live in Streatham. Anyway, she had this really interesting family background. She's of mixed parentage. So her dad was an African-American Shakespearean actor, which blew my mind. And then she had a Swedish mum who was also an actress and a singer, etc., and performer. She attended the Royal College of Music and sung opera and composed classical music and was just this phenomenal figure. And I just think if we don't touch base with some of our history around these great people who've done such a magnificent impact on our society, whether it be music, theatre, arts, etc., then we're losing sight of who we are as a people. And we're not giving our younger generation an opportunity to learn and to see that people like them can exist in different types of roles and different types of sectors in the world. So for me, Amanda Aldridge was fantastic.
That is a wonderful, and that's me. I'm learning as well by hearing from you. And I'll put it up again. I just put an icon of what she looked like. She's just so beautiful as well and talented. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us, Symone. And are you still into classical music? Have you got a favorite composer, just out of interest?
Well, I love anything that's kind of, I don't have a particular favorite piece of music, but for me, I love the proms. Just like when the proms come, I'm like crazy mad for it. Yeah. And I just love the fact when it's something, I love the merger of new music and old music, so, and I think the proms does that very well. It kind of removes that fuddy-duddiness around it. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like there is a perception that anything that's ballet, theatre, classical music, it's not for us, or we don't sit in that space. Whereas we can sit in the reggae, calypso, Caribbean, R&B space, but that space doesn't always seem like it's open to us. So when I see somebody who's passionate and can play an instrument and can play classical music, or you can sing opera, I'm just in awe, because I just think that's amazing. That's amazing that we can show the younger generation, which I don't feel I had when I was growing up, the capacity that we can be in different positions across the world doing different things. And I think that is just, for me, that is the world we should be living in.
Absolutely. And do you feel that has that passion from when you were very young, when you were questioning why things are the way that they are, do you feel that you've carried that through, that determination, that inquisitiveness, all the way through to what you do now and what you're promoting in your work?
Yes and no. I think it's challenging to continually be curious as you get older. I think when you're younger, you're much more engaged in asking questions and challenging the status quo. I think as you get older, it becomes tiring, I think, to always put yourself out there to be saying, well, why is this like this? And I suppose this will resonate with a lot of people who are listening to us at the moment. They probably are feeling exactly the same. But I don't think the tiredness should be an excuse to give up. I think we always have to keep going at it. And that's the only way we can make a change and make things be different. So for me, yes, there are moments where I'm more curious, and there are some moments when I'm not too curious. But I try and see if I can find a balance. And when I'm not too curious, I use the energy of my son or my mum or, someone else around me to give me the inspiration to move forward.
That's lovely. And I'm a big fan of lots of music, but I know that people like have you heard of the Canny Masons, the family?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure they were at the proms at some point. Of course, proms have been controversial the last night recently. So it's brought up all kinds of stuff. But thank you for bringing that to us. That was really interesting. So we're going to hear now from Louise and her inspiration, and then we'll bring you back both into the stream. Hi, Louise.
Hi. I'm not sure how I can follow that, Symone.
That was good,
I think I didn't go quite as highbrow as you, but I was a mixed race child, and I was born in the 1960s and a child in the early 70s. And so I picked people who, for me, kind of resonated the fact that I was seeing different faces on the television and around me. And this was quite unusual because I was brought up in an all white family because my mother's white, and I was brought up by my stepfather who was white. And so to start to see different ethnicities and different people from different cultures was really important to me growing up. Because it made a little bit of sense of why I looked the way I did. And so the first person I chose was Floella Benjamin, who was a children's presenter on children's television. And she was on Play School. And so, any child that didn't have, the internet would be sat in front of really good children's television. And I can remember watching her, and she could sing and she could move, she could dance, and she just had this beautiful way about her. And I realized quite recently that she went on to have an OBE for her services to children's television, and she's actually an honorary member of the House of Lords. And I just thought that was a beautiful recognition of who she was and what she does. And she continues even now to be, a mother figure for children's rights and the quality of children's television. And the other person I picked was, again, perhaps an unlikely choice, but Fatima Whitbread, who was an Olympian athlete in the 1980s. And I think this was the first time we were starting to see Black athletes do really well. And she was incredibly muscular. She wasn't, your typical kind of tiny athlete that we would see today as a runner. And I just remember being really inspired by her. And I was quite athletic at the time. I kind of did long jump and canoeing and Duke of Edinburgh and everything, sailing, swimming medals. And so she was just always there, you know, on the news doing well and kind of breaking records. And so I thought that was wonderful. And then I went for a really obvious choice, but one that I couldn't ignore, and that was the music of Bob Marley. And so my dad used to play Bob Marley when I was a teenager, and it used to be beating through the house. And even now I find that I can remember all the words, and I can remember being in a people carrier with my 3 sons driving on holiday and Bob Marley records coming on, and they knew all the words as well. And I just think how incredibly inspirational he was. And he, you know, he stood up about, you know, I think about get up, stand up. We talked about standing up for your rights. And I think, you know, I was aware at that point that songs and music could be political and for the better. And there are other people in history as well. Recently, Mary Seacole has been sort of thought about in Black history because she was as inspirational as Florence Nightingale. And of course, I can remember as well when Nelson Mandela came out of prison, when my first son was born, around about the 1990s. And I can remember thinking, this is a momentous moment when apartheid was abolished, and at the same time the Berlin Wall came down. And so, you know, as a young mother, and as you know, with my first child, I can remember thinking, I want more for my children. This needs to be a different world. And it felt like there was a sense that things were starting to change.
That's just wonderful, talking us through all that. And that was just equally as inspirational. There's so much in that where you were talking about the inspirational figures that really inspired you when you were younger, whether it was in sports, whether it was in entertainment, and then carrying that through from your early days now to the next generation, and how you're having conversation and culture is spurring on all of those political and cultural discussions with your own family. So, I'm so glad I asked the question, even though it's not the topic that we're covering today, but that was really fantastic. So I'm going to bring Symone back in, and we're going to move on to talking about the work that you two are doing, that you've done over the summer. So this is kind of like the what, and then we're going to go on and reflect about it later. But for people who don't know, you've been up to a lot of things, the webinars and the peer support groups and lots of other bits in between. So Symone, could you start us off? Because a lot of this, and don't be modest, was your brainchild, yeah? So your idea, you're thinking we have to be doing something. And I'd love to hear where that came from your point of view. And also what you're doing, what you've done. So I'm going to take myself out. If you could just explain to us for a little bit.
Okay. So I suppose I have to start from the point of view of saying that Stuart and Care has always been committed to working and supporting our diverse workforce. And we've done this over the last sort of 9 years with the Moving Up programme. But I suppose what the two key things is that we've delivered successfully the Moving Up programme, which was aimed at tapping into talent and skills for our workforce from the Black, Asian and ethnic minority group. We've continually monitored our participants' background to ensure that we have a wide cross-section of across all our leadership programs, from leaders from different backgrounds, so that there is a representation across the piece. And as a result of that, we felt that we had the knowledge and the experience around delivering these pieces of work. So we understand that there are challenges facing our diverse workforce because of what we know from delivering the Moving Up programme, because of what we hear when we talk to participants.
Can I just ask you, just for anyone who doesn't know the Moving Up programme, I know that was kind of before you started all of this.
Sure.
Can you just explain to us what that is? Yeah,
so we as Louise and I said earlier on, part of Stuart and Care remit is that we deliver leadership and management interventions. And one of the interventions is we do a number of leadership programs, and we have a specific leadership program that's aimed at Black, Asian and ethnic minority leaders in the sector. The hope and the reason and the rationale for creating this program was that we would get wider representation across all our leadership aspects in the workforce from a Black and Asian and ethnic minority perspective. Because what we know is that often when you look at the demographics of our leaders, often they appear to be all white. So that was why the rationale and the reason of the program came about. And as I said, we've been delivering it for 9 years, and we've had roughly somewhere in the region of 200 plus participants on the program. So just taking us back a step to where we're going. So having learned from the Moving Up program, having monitored our participants on all our leadership programs, we're really acutely aware of all the challenges facing our diverse workforce. And then obviously, like everyone else in the world, Black Lives Matter movement came about, and then we had COVID. So we've been through quite a bit as a world. And COVID literally shone the light on the number of disproportionate deaths that were affecting those from diverse communities. So having had the time, because at that point we had to, as an organization, which I imagine was the same across many organizations, take stock of where we are. I just thought, well, there seems to be a piece missing around the work that we're doing currently. So as I said, at Skills for Care, we value our engagement with the sector, and through our market intelligence that we gathered from our locality managers, we identified that the challenges facing those from BAME workforce was prevalent, was really urgent, and it was a real concern. So myself and my team, and it isn't just me, Sophie, I would love to say it was all me and take all the credit, but it is Louise, Louise, Paul, Patrick, all the other guys in the team, Jane, in the leadership and management team, came together. And I said, look, I really feel that there's an opportunity for us to do something more. So what we wanted to do was to have a better understanding of what was happening in the sector as the environment was constantly changing. And we wanted to test if there was an appetite for a series of webinars and peer coaching. And what my thinking was that I was feeling very much isolated as a Black woman. And I was constantly listening to things on the news, and I was constantly hearing things about COVID. And I just thought, well, there's got to be, if I'm feeling like this, if I'm feeling isolated and lonely, and I don't know where I should be turning, other people must be feeling exactly the same way. Anyway, with the support of the leadership team within Skills for Care and our board, and in particular, one of our board members, Munira Tabani, we decided to come together and deliver a piece of work that was specifically aimed at providing people of color with a safe space to be able to have a topic of conversation around some of the challenges facing our workforce. But before we took to actually doing the work, we thought what we should better do, as I've said before, we really want to engage with our sector, and we've tried to do that as often as we can. We thought we'd go out to the sector and ask what their thoughts around what was happening. So we launched an online survey on the 26th of June, asking the sector what webinars we should focus on and what current challenges they were facing. And we've had over 500 plus responses to the survey, which was phenomenal, really phenomenal. Since then, we've had a chance to analyze the survey, because as you imagine, there's a lot of data. It wasn't just an option of selecting what you think goes 1, 2, or 3. There was a lot of contextual data in it that needed to be analyzed. The sector said there were top three challenges for them. And these were around racism, progression and representation, and health and well-being. So if I look at all three of these things collectively in more detail, and let's take racism to start with, there was a really strong theme coming through that a high proportion of the people who responded to the survey categorized their experience of racism as one of the top 3 challenges for the workforce. And this included stuff like institutional racism, systemic racism, and racism from service users. This was also really followed closely by bullying and abuse, which was one of the things that they thought was really challenging for them. They also included things around equality, inequality, and discrimination. Respondents often felt that they didn't have a voice, or they weren't heard or being seen. When we looked to the next challenge, progression and representation, there were some close links to the topics of racism. Respondents felt that they were barriers that prevented people from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority backgrounds from progressing in the workforce. This isn't new to us. We've heard this throughout the last 9 years when we were delivering the Moving Up program. All the participants who've come on in one way or another have said this has been a challenge for them. Particularly in the leadership and management positions, and particularly in senior leadership roles. This included a lack of development opportunities, a lack of training, a lack of support. And as a consequence, our diverse workforce feel that they're not represented when it comes to the decision-making powers of an organization. If we can move on to the third challenge, health and well-being, respondents feel and have said that they were anxious about the increased risks faced by those from Black and Asian and ethnic minority groups in relation to COVID. And often they felt they weren't being heard again, and they weren't being sufficiently protected at work. So often, as you all know, Safi, when you chaired and facilitated the webinars for us, they felt there was a lack of PPE, there was a lack of understanding around risk assessment. And if the risk assessment was done, it wasn't done very well. There was a lack of understanding about the needs of the people that were being assessed. They also felt that mental health has also increased. And I think what we're trying to unpick at the moment was this linked to the experience of racism, or was this specific anxiety around COVID? There are some other challenges that came up, and these focus around pay, or a lack of pay, a lack of understanding, as I said before. There was a lot of issues around acceptance, recognition, respect, being valued, a lack of support, a lack of confidence. So for me, what really stood out is a lack of a lot of things. So as I mentioned earlier, we also asked the respondents filling out the survey to tell us about what relevant topics they wanted us to discuss in the webinar. And unfortunately, because we were trying to, as Sophie said, as you said, we were trying to do it in such a short time frame. The survey went out, and I was conscious that summer was rolling on, and I really wanted to kickstart this work. So we couldn't wait for the survey to close and analyze the data before we started the webinars. So we took a punt on what we thought the things that people would want to discuss. And actually, what the analysis of the survey shows is that we were right. So when we asked them about what they wanted to discuss in the webinars, here's what they've said: racism, particularly institutional systematic racism and how to overcome it, organization, policies and practices, including difficult conversations and how to have them, and how should their line manager have these conversations, more importantly. Equality, inequality, including pay and discrimination, issues around progression and representation, and obviously Black Lives Matter. There were some other topics suggested by more than one respondent in each case, which included what we should be doing more in terms of our diverse workforce. So how can we get those in the sector to do more around supporting diverse workforce? And how can we get our workforce to be more resilient and having a sense of belonging? I think we've touched on pretty much all of these in the webinar, so I don't feel like there wasn't an opportunity to discuss these in detail. And I think even if we didn't have an opportunity to discuss those in detail in the webinars, they were certainly picked up throughout the peer coaching. And I suppose Louise will be able to give you a bit more details about that moving forward.
That's really helpful, Symone. And it's exactly what I was hoping to do, that linkage between what you'd learn as as working in Skills for Care towards thinking about what can we do to help the sector, then actually consulting with the sector to find people affected to find out what would be useful for you, rather than just saying, right, this is kind of on vogue at the moment, let's do a load of stuff for people who are non-white in this area. You really wanted to make it meaningful, and I'm really excited then to go on to how you took the webinars from talking about it. And I think that definitely needs to be a space for discussion, but also to think about how do we take it into people's personal working lives and support them in that space. So I've got so many different clips. I've got 3 clips I could show. Which one to do? I might just show a couple. I know it's going back. I might cut them a bit short, but I find Sedi Frederick, who we're interviewing later on in the week, he does lay it out quite nicely, and then John Browder takes it in a deeper perspective, and then someone also talks about building alliances. So I might just go to Sedi first, just to give people a flavour of what was covered in the webinars, but also to encourage people to go back and watch them, because you did 4. We did 4 webinars over the 4 weeks, one a week, and they were consistently well attended. And also there were discussions afterwards. So there's a screenshot of us there. I think that was one of the last webinars.
That was the last one.
Yeah. Okay. So let's hear from Sedi.
Acclaimed Professor David Williams of Harvard University put it more bluntly, and have explicitly described racism as the fundamental driver of ethnic inequalities in health. This racism is structural and systemic. Institutions that have policies and practices that lead to unequal outcomes and interpersonal, or as David Williams describes it, everyday discrimination. Most BAME staff working in social care will have lived with everyday discrimination from a very early age. David Williams talks about it including being treated with less courtesy than other people, being treated with less respect than other people, people acting as if they think you're not smart, people acting as if they are afraid of you, to name but a few. And of course, we mustn't forget the death by 1,000 cuts of microaggression faced by BAME communities that is equally debilitating.
That was him kind of reflecting on some of the lived experiences. But also we had in the same webinar John Browder, and who so Sedi Frederick, he's also a consultant, and John Browder was a CEO for the NHS and now is a diversity and inclusion advisor, and he's just reflecting, and he does some great reflections. I've interviewed him before about it, and this is a bit deeper, but I think it's good to have a clip from both perspectives, an idea of what you covered on those webinars. So let's hear from John.
For me, there is a sense that we're importing that colonial behaviour into the public services in this country. And we're treating rafts of people, BME people that have come here willing to help this nation, as second-class citizens and subjugating them. And again, there's no way that we can look at that and think that it's okay. And so I asked the question, did COVID kill our BME colleagues? Or was it us and our system that put them in harm's way? Because it treated them differently. It failed to protect them. It failed to treat them equally. So these are the issues for me that I struggle with now. And I think
so he goes on again, but it's a nice reflection to show what the kind of issues that you delve deep into. And I remember that webinar we had, and there was so many people that came back on Q&A, and they was just really pouring out thoughts and emotions and experiences, because we had such a good cross section of people from health and social care, different seniority, just talking about the issue. And obviously we need to act, we need to do things, but also there's absolutely a space to just have these conversations as well. So yeah, that was great. And it was good to know that you didn't stop there. Of course, you thought, what else could you do as alongside these webinars, is peer support group. So can you just in sort of 30 seconds explain how that works alongside, and then we'll bring Louise in to explain it a bit more?
Sure. So I suppose when we were pulling this together as a team, my sense was that, as I said, I was definitely feeling isolated, sitting at home working, and I suppose I wanted the opportunity to be able to give people in our sector a safe space, because I don't know about anyone else, but I don't really want to be talking about some of the challenges that I've experienced as a Black woman in an open forum. I'm happy to raise my hand and ask a question. I'm happy to challenge somebody on something they've said. But when I'm talking about my own lived experience, I want it to be a really safe space. And I suppose that's what I was hoping would come out of those peer coaching sessions. We wanted to give people who'd attended the webinars, and maybe if they didn't attend the webinars and had something they wanted to say or share, to meet in a very small, intimate space. So we kept the numbers very low in terms of the number of people who could attend the peer coaching. It was a maximum of 10. And I suppose I only did a 1 or 2 because I had to go off and leave, and Louise did the majority of them and managed them. But what I found when I attended the 2 that I did was that the ability to be able to share your lived experience with other like-minded people who understood. So you didn't have to take them on a journey and explain and take them down the road for them to understand what it is you were talking about. They got it instantly.
Yeah.
And also, it was about giving people the opportunity that actually you're sharing a story and something's not quite right. You know in your heart, but you don't know why it's not quite right. So once they started to share, actually the other colleagues in the group said, that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that, or your organization shouldn't be doing that. But I suppose what was interesting for me was exploring that and watching that, because until you're in that safe space and you feel confident enough to be able to share that, even if the back of your mind, you're thinking, I know this doesn't feel quite right, but I don't know why it doesn't feel quite right. Until you share that and you vocalize that, and then you have the support of other people in the group saying, no, you are right. This isn't on, and your organization shouldn't be doing that. You could see that people were uplifted, that their spirits were uplifted, that they were able to then take the support of their peers and then go back into their organizations to try and do something differently.
Great. Thank you for that, Symone. That's really great segue into finding more about those peer support groups. So I'll take you out for a moment just to hear from Louise. Hi, Louise. So that kind of like you've got Symone explaining how really living and breathing the ethos around peer support. So you had those smaller groups and people were kind of feeling empowered to take that learning back into the workplace and do something about the situation they were faced with. So can you tell us a bit more about kind of how it worked? Symone explained it was the groups of 10. Obviously, it was online, and then go into some of the things that came out of the peer support groups that you ran.
Yeah, sure. I think people had really welcomed the webinars. Some people had attended them, some people have heard about them, and then came to the peer support groups afterwards. And it was really an open platform in which people could talk further. So their kind of thought process had been ignited by some of the inspirational speakers on the webinars. And of course, they'd gone away and they'd thought about this a little bit more. And they were thinking about, again, their own stories, their own lived experiences, and what they could do within their own organisation. So we had a real mix of people that came along to the peer support and the coaching sessions afterwards. Somebody actually said, and this is a quote, this had been a true and real initiative delivered with truth and sincerity, and she admired that we dared to do something and we dared to do the intervention, which I thought was a really nice thing to say. Some people said that their webinars were so positive and inspirational, and it gave them a focus for their own anger and their own thought processes, and some of the language as well that came out in the webinars started to sort of resonate into people's common language. So people talked about having iron boots with very, strong feet on the ground, ready to kind of, do what they needed to do within their own organisation. And there was an analogy, I think, that somebody must have said on one of the webinars about putting your own oxygen mask on first so you can then help others. And these kind of phrases came out in the conversations in the webinars as well. And I think it empowered people to be able to speak out about their own experiences. And one lady was saying she had her own mental health issues, and that COVID had heightened this kind of kind of issue around her own well-being, and the webinars had inspired her to talk out and allow others to talk about the kind of anxieties that they were having about working on the front line, and perceiving themselves as being more at risk than other colleagues. And so we talked about all sorts of things. First of all, we gave everybody an opportunity to talk about what their immediate challenges were. And there were some obvious feedback around allowing relatives into services to visit their loved ones, around PPE. But people started to talk in depth about other initiatives around things like reverse mentoring, where people were actually working with their CEO to say what their experiences was, to say that they'd been quiet most of their working life and now they wanted a voice, and that really we needed to support people from a BAME background. And people talked about, you know, making sure that we provide opportunities within organisations for people to have those conversations, to say what it feels like, to never perhaps get the promotion, always be in the running but never quite get there, and to have that bravery to try and progress into senior management roles, even though, you know, your own experience could be that it took you an awful lot longer to get there. And people talked about their health, and there were lots of conversations about how people from a BAME background were likely to have other health issues. People talked about people dying early, about people having cancer, and there seemed to be a commonality around, you know, the health issues that people had during their working lives. But I think as well, it was quite inspirational because they talked about what they felt organisations should do around equality and diversity, how the rights of people from a BAME background need to be listened to, need to be thought about, needed to be embedded in policy and practice, and that we needed to have a whole systems approach to how we think about support. And we need to think about the integration with health, and all sorts of kind of, you know, network linkage type advice that came out. And mainly, I think the number one is to have the conversation and to provide a platform for people to talk further about what worries them, and how they're going to continue to work alongside their colleagues. And I think the whole Black Lives Matters campaign has really ignited people to be able to speak up and do more. And actually, you know, some people as well, it was really lovely. We had some homegrown talent. And by that, I mean, we had people who had been on the previous Moving Up programme who came back and said, I got furious at this point and I went to talk to my CEO and we're now doing this. And I thought it was really nice because, you know, there were people we'd met in the past who had moved up, but also they were still remaining passionate and they wanted to do more. And so, yeah, I have no regrets about doing the peer coaching and would definitely do it again, because I think that added to the webinars allowed the continuity of the conversations that were started during the webinars.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that so many people needed to have these conversations just to help people to have empathy with their situation, because I think sometimes when you talk to people, there's almost a sense of denial, as in we're all in this together equally, but there's no difference between our experiences. And so it's important to highlight that there is difference. There's a lot of statistics. There's the Kevin Fenton report and a whole set of other reports that have come out to say that actually these groups are suffering in a lot of different ways during this period. So it is lovely that you're actually giving people a space to kind of be confident to go back to their organizations and say, actually, I'm not happy with this and I need some support in some way. And it's good to hear that you got feedback from people and they have started to make that change. Do you feel that that is the majority of people that have engaged with the program, or is it going to be a learning gradual process for people to affect that change within their organization? Because at the end of the day, they're only one person.
I think it's a mixture. I think it depends on the passion of the individual and their bravery as well. Sometimes people were thinking about their own situations, but others are genuinely starting to think, how can we influence, and how can we influence the way that senior management think about the whole workforce, and think about true and genuine support from people from a BAME background. And also think about them in terms of their risk, particularly around COVID-19, and whether they're more at risk on the front line than perhaps other members of the team.
Okay, great. We just had pop up there. I don't know if we can get it up again. There's quite a lot of information on it. But yeah, so these are some peer support. This is examples of things that occurred that you shared with us, some of your notes. So on managing links with health, leadership, a gap between policy and practice, like you explained, and service delivery. So there is a lot in there. So thank you for that. What I want to do now, I know we've gone a bit over time, but maybe sort of spend 5 or so minutes just between you and Symone, just reflecting on this period of the work that you've done. So you've given us a great explanation on what happened and some of the impacts, but also kind of looking back at what you might change if you were going to do it in the future, and what you would like to do in a perfect world going forward, either within Skills for Care or within this field in social care. So I'll bring Symone back in. Great. So I'm going to leave it to you two to have a little bit of that reflection. Start wherever you want to start, but like I said, if you could kind of talk about what you did between yourselves and where you want to take things forward. Is that okay?
Sure.
Good. Okay, I'll leave you to it for a sec.
Okay, thanks.
You want to start, Symone?
Hello. In terms of reflection, I suppose if my heart is given the space to have what it wants, what I would like is for there to be a significant shift in attitude. And I was hoping, and I would hope that this work, what we've done, would get people to start thinking differently, being differently, whether it be with a colleague who sits across your office floor from you, whether it be how you implement policies and procedures across your organization, but just having that conscious thought around how it must feel for people from diverse backgrounds to be working, to be living, to constantly be experiencing some of the things that they've told us they've been experiencing, and what that might, and how you might make their lives much more easier.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to just see some sort of continuation of the project in some way, and I know we're starting to think what that might look like. But actually, once people's voices and thoughts have been ignited, I hope that will continue, and that they will continue then to be the influencers of policy and practice within their own organisation, and that they kind of won't go quiet again. I don't think, what one person said, that they wouldn't be put back in their box. Once they found their voice, that was it. Yes. And I do think we are at this point in history where I'd like to think that there isn't any going back, and that each organisation can progress and they can do so much more, and that we need to sort of find a way of supporting people within the sector, and also getting more people into sort of senior management roles as well, you know, being brave enough to progress and to influence and to start to share some of the good practice. I'd like to see that happening, which I believe did start in both the webinars and the peer support. People were passing on emails and they were sharing their risk assessment documentation. Yes. And I'd like to see more of that, so that can be shared with the whole sector. I guess that would be my aspiration, if you like, for things moving forward.
Yeah, I think what I've learned from the process is that I will never do the amount of webinars we did in that short space of time. I think if we'd had more time to be able to do more in-depth webinars, or maybe have more of them, I would have loved that. I mean, I know we're talking about, and we're exploring currently about doing another series of 4 webinars again, but I suppose, you know, it felt for me that the hour wasn't long enough. The discussion kind of got started, and it then kind of had to tail off because we ran out of time. So I would like, I suppose, if we were going to do it again, to have much more time for people to have a richer conversation about some of the topic areas.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it definitely has to continue in some sort of way. And in terms of lessons learned, I think my biggest lesson would be that sometimes you've got to dare to do something, even if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
We dared to make a start, and we could have left it until things were a little bit more perfect, or we were further through the summer. But actually, you know, sometimes when something is urgent and relevant, you've got to make a start, even if as an organisation you realise that, you know, there might be things you would do differently next time, you know, like longer webinars. But we're living in this virtual world as well, which, you know, kind of a challenge in its own right. So we've got to think about people's attention spans and
True.
willing to do, and you know, how long people can sit in the seat without fidgeting, you know, when their real workload is also looming.
That's very true. That's very true.
With your lessons learned as well. Mine are very similar.
Excellent.
Thank you. That was just brilliant. It was lovely to kind of watch you reflect on that. I've also got a question. How do you feel like the whole process has affected you both personally? Have you felt like it's kind of invigorated you to do more, or was it draining at any point? Because I know hearing all these experiences over a short period of time can feel a little bit emotionally heavy. How was it for both of you? Maybe Louise, start us off.
I think it's true to say that if you carry out any peer coaching, sometimes you do absorb some of the kind of worries of the people participating. But I think it was more inspirational than that. I think because people were being empowered, you know, it kind of felt good to go with that. Yeah, that's probably all I've got to say. Symone, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose I'm in agreement with Lou that I did feel empowered at the end of it. But I'm not going to lie, Sophie. I think you and I have already before we started this, I was feeling very angry. And I think I'd even shared with the team that I said, I feel like I'm going through a period of, and as one of my good girlfriends will say to me, I was getting radical, really radical about everything. Yeah. And as Lou, I love the term that Lou used earlier, and I was getting out my box, and I was constantly feeling like that about everything. So I think this piece of work was almost a bit cathartic for me, because it felt like I needed to do something, and my energy around it was getting to the point that I thought, I'm going to lose it if I don't feel like I'm having some kind of productive impact. So I think at the start, I was very much right, we need to do something. We need to get something off the ground. And I know I was driving it pretty hard and had lots of expectations around it. But actually, once it was up and running, the delivery of it felt like it was very much in the right space, that it needed to happen. And so, as Lou said, it was, you know, listening to some of the stories and listening to the webinar. Even this morning when we listened to the clip of the webinar, I was just like, I need to go back, because I was so caught up in doing the delivery. I was so caught up in ensuring that everything was in its right place and that everyone needed to know what they needed to know, that actually I'm missing out on that really key learning. And some of the things that our wonderful speakers said were phenomenal. So I'd like to take the opportunity to go back and sit and have a moment where I can pretty much engage with that content and learn. And I don't think I've had the opportunity to do that yet.
Yeah, and I think, yes, go on, Louise.
Well, I was just going to say, I think when you're involved in any initiative of this type, you kind of hit it in many, many levels. So you go on a personal journey and it brings up all sorts of memories around growing up and racism and inequalities. And then you go on a kind of organizational journey of what you're trying to achieve as an organization, and what you hope will be the start of a good process and a legacy. But then you're kind of thinking about wider support for the sector. So it's hard not to sort of cut yourself in twos or threes, because you're thinking about an initiative like this on many levels, and it does bring up personal thoughts and passions, which actually you shouldn't apologize for, because that's what makes the initiative work.
Absolutely, and I totally resonate with everything that you've been saying, and I just feel exactly the same, really. Just it spurs you on. It kind of, someone's got a rocket and put it underneath you, and you just want to do something because you think you're literally going to explode if you don't. And when you've done something, you feel, okay, that feels better. Yeah. And then it goes back again when you feel like you need to do something, and it just kind of goes on and on and on. But you kind of know that the only way you can get over it is by actually just doing something. But I suppose the only thing we need to be careful of is, of course, our own well-being. And this is actually a good time to take stock. And things are about to change again in the winter, and maybe revisit those webinars. I don't know if we can put something in the chat with the link to them. Otherwise, they are on the Skills for Care website. If you just probably search BAME webinars, you'll probably find them, and people can listen to them. I've got a great tip. When I'm really busy, I tend to just have things like that on in the background when I'm cooking dinner or when I'm in the car. So it doesn't have to take up all your time of sitting down and watching it, but you could sit down, you could stream it onto your TV if you wanted to. But definitely it's a good idea to kind of try and engage with these things. There's a bit of soul food. Sometimes it does get you a little bit upset. Sometimes it actually makes you think, oh, I'm not on my own with this. So it's definitely a good thing to go back to, and it's a resource that's always going to be there for people, which is fantastic. And there's more coming up from Skills for Care, so people definitely need to keep in tune, follow them on Twitter and everything else. But we're coming to the end of the live stream, so I just want to say a huge thank you to you both, because I know you're just so busy, but having this hour with you has been fantastic. I can't wait to watch it back. So thank you,
Sophie. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Take care. Have a lovely rest of your day. So there you go, have it. Two fantastic, inspirational people from Skills for Care who work at Skills for Care. They're not technically from Skills for Care, but yeah, they've been doing some fantastic things, and I would absolutely advocate going back and watching those clips. And also, to add to that, I'm going to bring up something we also had on those webinars, the CEO of the CIPD, and he at the time, they were doing a lot of webinars themselves about this subject amongst the whole workforce, not just for social care. So here's a little bit of a clip from him that you can watch the full one back, and I will be back, so don't go away after this.
Leadership pipeline. There's some very interesting research I saw on this idea of tokenism. A very interesting research I saw from Harvard Business Review that talked about when you have a final shortlist, you might have one, say, black person, everybody else is white. The chances of they're getting a job is much reduced than if you had two black people and the others were white. So there's in a sector like yours, where, as Dudley called out, you have a lot of diversity. That should create pipelines of opportunity when you can truly get diverse shortlists to senior leadership positions. And it's really interesting to see the research. It reinforces this idea of bias and networks, that if you only have one black person or ethnic minority on a shortlist, their chances of getting the job are much reduced versus if you had more than one. So it's not just seen as tokenism. And I think you have that opportunity in a sector which already has such a high level of ethnic representation through its different ranks. And that's something we should all focus on.
Thank you so much, Peter. So there you have it. We have a lot of opportunity within our sector. We just need to tap into it. But that So there we go. So he again was obviously talking about diversity in the workforce within social care, but of course the lack of diversity within the higher management of social care. We've got a lot in the NHS that talks about that. If anyone's looked at the report, Snowy White Peaks of the NHS, that breaks down some research around that, and it's a similar picture in social care. So just a few things to go talk to you about what's coming up from our live streams this week. Actually, it's a busy week, so we're carrying on the theme of Colour for Care hashtag, and we will be interviewing both Sedi Frederick and Trisha Pereira, who are fantastic people, professionals within health and social care themselves, but also they were recently on the BAME advisory group task force. So that was a subgroup of the the social care task force that was led by David Pearson, that reported a couple of weeks ago about social care, the effects of COVID, and brought a lot of different reports and subgroups together. And their subgroup was specifically looking at BAME experience and the community. So we're going to be interviewing them about their report, what they did. I was also part of the advisory group, so I've worked with them. They're very inspirational, very co-productive, and they actually got so much done in such a short period of time. They were given the least amount of time out of all of the advisory groups to put something together, to put a report together. It's published. You can go and access it and read through it. It's very comprehensive. We did a very quick survey and got lots of views back and webinars and all sorts. So I really advise that you do, if you follow us on Twitter, or you can subscribe on our YouTube channel, you can like our Facebook page, and of course if you do all of that, try and do a reminder or click the bell on YouTube so that you'll get reminders of when we go live, because that's a really good one to listen to and reflect back on. And of course later on Thursday we will be talking, so we put together a packed panel of people to discuss the Act for Care report that was brought out by the Care Quality Commission on Friday. So fresh off the press, we're going to be having half an hour with Kate Tironi, who's the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care for the Care Quality Commission. The Care Quality Commission, obviously, CQC, the regulator for social care, health and social care, but we're going to be focusing on the adult social care sector. And after Kate, we're going to be having a discussion with 6 panelists. Don't ask me how we're going to manage that, but we are going to manage it. We're trying to figure it out. And a lot of these faces you will know. So on the right-hand side, you've got a list of managers: Mark Tops, Jonathan Cunningham, and Nicholas Key-Mew, fantastic care managers and advocates for the sector. And also you've got advocates Vic Rayner, Melanie Weatherly, and Jane Townsend. So you probably would have also heard of those 3. So really looking forward to that panel and that discussion. I would absolutely recommend that you stay in tune and you actually in kind of get involved in it, not least because you can actually ask Kate Tironi questions directly, like you have this on this live stream, on that live stream. But what we're also asking people to do is to have a think about the report. It brings up certain issues, including collaboration during COVID, and inequalities that we've just been talking about today, and a lot of other issues which are really have been quite pertinent before COVID, but that COVID has highlighted. Difficulties in maternity services, looking at the ratings for mental health institutions, and how actually a lot of them are either requires an improvement or some of them are inadequate. So I would really love if you could give us some questions to ask Kate in the next sort of 48 hours, then we can be ready to put those to her on Thursday. And of course, that will be your platform to ask questions directly to her. So really, really encourage you to either tweet us, email us at hi@coproducecare.com, and on Twitter one @CoproCare. and just really get those questions to her, because it's very difficult to get this amount of engagement from the regulator. Obviously, they're very busy, so we really want to bring that to you, and of course, share and spread the word. So that's pretty much enough from me today. And yeah, thank you so much for engaging with us, for joining in. And I'm going to leave you with a last clip from one of the webinars that Skills for Care did. And again, very inspirational. So this panelist is talking about building alliances. So we'll just let that clip play us out, and we look forward to seeing you later on this week for the rest of our webinars. Take care, everybody.
It's upon the individuals to also say, what can I do? So for colleagues and managers who have a responsibility in social care to support staff, it's very important that they create this space to allow individuals who are feeling pain as a result of being seen as the other to share